Hey painting friends, it's Stoof here. Welcome back to my channel. In this week's painting tutorial, we are going to work on an acrylic painting of a mountain landscape in Washington State. If you are new to this channel, make sure you hit the subscribe button so you don't miss out on any future painting tutorials. Okay, for our materials today, I have an 11-inch by 14-inch canvas panel right here. I have a cup of water for cleaning off my brushes. I'm going to keep that right there. I have a disposable paper palette. I'm using acrylic paints today, heavy-bodied acrylic paints. We have the colors titanium white, ultramarine blue, phthalo blue, burnt umber, olive green or sap green, either one would work, alizarin crimson, phthalo green, and this is like a cadmium yellow mixed with like a Naples yellow type of color. So if you have like a warm yellow, that would be good for this one. For my brushes today, we should only need 3 paintbrushes today. I have one flat tip brush right here. I have one smaller angled brush for getting more of the ridges on the mountains. And I have a liner brush for getting some of those little highlights and grasses in the foreground. I also have some paper towels for cleaning off my brushes. Okay, now that we have gone over materials, let's get started on this tutorial. All right, painting friends. We are going to break down this tutorial so it is on the beginner level for you. And the first thing we're going to do is just get a little bit of water on our brush and just like dab it gently on the paper towel so it's not dripping. Then we're going to take a little bit of ultramarine blue and just swirl it around, get that on both sides of your paintbrush. And you're going to look at your canvas, depending on what size it is, you just want to find the center point in general on your canvas. You don't have to use a ruler. You can if that's going to make you feel better. But in general, that is about the center point. Then I'm going to put a little tag there, a little tag at the top, a little one on the right, and a little one on the left. So now my canvas is in 4 quadrants: upper left, upper right, lower right. And that's how I'm going to explain things to you as I'm working on this painting. Before we start really painting things in, I want to sketch out what we're going to be painting. So I'm just taking a little bit of white mixed with some ultramarine blue. And I just did that so it's a little bit lighter. Again, I'm twirling the brush around on the paper palette here just to get good coverage on both sides. And it's okay if there's not a whole lot of paint on your brush yet. Don't worry about that too much because we're just kind of sketching out the concept right now. So next I want you to look from your center point to the top. By the way, I want to briefly mention that if you don't have the canvas in these exact same dimensions, they should be similar, like a 12 by 16 inch or like a 9 by 12 inch canvas. I don't think you should have your canvas angled this way, or you don't want to have a square canvas because those dimensions are not going to translate evenly to what I'm teaching you guys here based on what I'm about to tell you. So keep that in mind with the canvas that you're using. If you're using a different ratio dimension canvas, then you're going to be following directions a little bit differently. Okay, so from that center point to the top, put a little tick about halfway between top to bottom of that, and then do another tick halfway there. And that is where the top of our mountains are going to be, around that spot. So I'm just getting a little bit more water on my brush so I can very loosely paint in where some of these mountains are going to go. All right, next I'm looking at that, and now I'm kind of dividing the canvas into about thirds. So 1, 2, 3. This is taking up a little bit more space than those two, but that's okay. And that's where I'm going to put my farthest back ridge. So I'm just kind of taking the brush, letting it loosely put a couple little marks there. And that is going to be my ridge farthest in the background. Moving down just a little bit more. And do another ridge here. That's going to meet it right where that one ended and start to come up a bit higher, have a little deeper valleys in between the ridges there. And then This one just kind of stops right there. The next ridge, so this one's here, the next ridge coming closer to us is going to start here, right about center, make its way up, come up past this one just by a little bit, come back down, come back up and down, and then a couple little ridges going off. I'm going to add another little ridge back here that's a little farther in the distance. Okay, maybe a little bit more there so we don't see too much of that behind there. Okay, so now we got 1, 2, 3. We're going to make the next one go across the whole thing. So I'm going to add a little bit more dark of my ultramarine blue just so that you guys can tell the difference here. You're welcome to do that too if you want. And the next one, I'm going to start closer to the center here. So I'm going to start about the same height as this one, but over here a little bit under this ridge. Going to make this ridge come down, bring it back up, down, and up, and then a big one over here, kind of coming off the page. Then I'm going to continue over here. These are a little bit more bumpy, not quite as sharp. One more peak right here, and that's going to kind of fade off. All right, so now we have 1, 2, 3, 4 ridges. The next really big ridge that I want us to focus on, I'm going to take more blue, and I'm going to mix some brown in there too, just so you guys, again, are able to separate how much closer this ridge is than those other ones. And this next one, we're looking at our center point, and this tick we put halfway between top and center. And I want you to put a tick about halfway between this and that center, so down even more there. And that is where this next ridge is going to come through, just a little bit under that spot. And it is going to come off of the page. So from here, halfway up to the bottom, we're going to put a halfway mark about there, and it is going to come off the page halfway between those, basically. So halfway, halfway right here. And the angle, actually I'm going to make it go down just a little bit lower under that. The angle's pretty steep here. It's kind of just like this. Kind of gets a little bit less steep as we're getting towards the center, and then got another little ridge here. And look how far I am still from this one up here. I never quite make it all the way up there. Gonna put a couple more little peaks. Okay, and there's that guy. And they're just jagged little things, so don't worry about your little jagged lines looking exactly like mine, because everybody's painting is going to look different, but still hopefully makes sense as long as we're following the pattern here. All right, next, from here, about the halfway point, you're gonna make a nice little ridge going up. We've got another little ridge kind of visible, not quite to the halfway point yet. Comes a little bit past halfway between those. And this kind of just makes its way on up there. And another one kind of sneaking in here. And you guys don't have to do this many ridges if you don't want to. If that's too complicated for you, you don't have to worry about it. But it's going to be a really good lesson in value as we're working on these ridges. Okay, next big ridge is going to have some green in it, if that's what you want to do when you're sketching it out. If you want to keep everything the same color when you sketch it, that's fine too. And the next one is going to go right through center here, just like this, at an angle. It's a softer angle because this is covered in vegetation. And then from this point comes down, so a little bit below your center point here, and your next ridge is going to be more of a straight line at an angle, kind of comes up like this, and it's going to just make its way down there like that. Got another little ridge. So here we've got halfway between these two, maybe up a little higher there. And that is where this one's going to come through. And this one's got a little ridgy. This is just like a rock. And this rock's going to stop somewhere around here. And we've got another little ridge with some grass on it about right there. Another little spot with some grass there as well, and another rock right there. Okay, so if that seemed pretty complicated, don't worry, because that was the hardest part, just laying out where everything is going to go in the painting. Now I'm putting that angled brush in the water, and I'm taking my flat tip brush out, and now we can start with painting things farthest in the distance and making our way to the foreground. So we're going to start with white and some phthalo blue. Okay, getting good even coverage on both sides of the brush. You guys don't want to have too much paint on your brush, but you want to have enough paint on your brush. So I'll get it a little bit more even there. So see how there's a little bit of paint. You can see some texture on the brush, but it's not like dripping and it's not like super dry. All right, now that we've got the paint on the brush, we're going to go back and forth at the top of the canvas. You want to make sure you're going back and forth using both sides of the brush, even pressure, and getting good coverage to fill in all the little spaces of white in the canvas texture. You don't want to leave any little white spaces there. Okay, so I just did that right at the top. Next I'm going to take some white and some of my phthalo green and just use a little bit of phthalo green. If you use too much phthalo green, it's not going to look natural. So we just want a little bit so that it becomes a bit of a warmer greenish blue. And now I'm putting that just below the blue. Okay, now that that's on there, I'm going to take my paper towel. I'm going to get the extra paint off my brush, just like this. So there's still paint on it, but it's not, it's more dry now. And now I'm going to blend. So just going right over that spot, back and forth, same brush strokes, not using as much pressure. It's a little bit softer force now. And this back and forth is giving me a smoother transition from that horizon where we see the sky meet the mountains up to the deeper blue in the sky at the top. Okay, and that's not perfect, but it's going to work for me for now. Now I'm going to take more white and tiny little bit more blue got in there, but looking at values here, this is lighter than this, so lighter in value, so that's good, that's what we want. And now I'm going to just go right over to the little edges of the mountains that I had, getting my nice little ridges in there. If you want, you could actually paint over what you had down, but then you're going to have to try to re-find where your mountain peaks are. So I'm trying to still kind of show where the peaks are, but not have too much going on. All right, and now that I did that, I'm going to take the extra paint off of the brush, and we're just going to go back and forth just like we did before, being really light, not using too much force. And that's just blending all up into the sky. And then this is your painting, so if you want to add some clouds or something, you're welcome to do that too. For simplicity reasons, I'm just going to leave the sky like that. Okay, I'm going to put this brush away now and switch to my smaller angled brush. Okay, next we're taking some phthalo blue with some white, a little bit of crimson, maybe even a little bit more crimson. We want to have still on the blue side. You don't want it to look quite purple yet, but you definitely want it to be more purple than the sky. Okay, and we're going to actually lighten this value up a bit more by adding a little more white. You don't want this to be too dark. You want this just to be a little bit darker than the top of your sky. And I'm going to start just holding the brush to get those nice little ridges in here. And I'm working this in while the sky is still wet because these clouds are, or the clouds, the mountain is so far in the distance that it's not going to look super sharp to your eye. And by letting it be painted in here while the sky's still wet, that makes it blend just a little bit in with the background sky, and that will help push it even farther into the distance. So once I get the ridge kind of outlined in there, trying to get some nice sharp little peaks, I'm very gently going over a few of these to keep it really soft. Getting all of this coverage, making sure I'm not leaving any of my sketch marks or any of the white space on the canvas. Okay, once that's in there, I'm just going to take some white on my brush. I'm going to start from the little valley or little ridge, the little valley here, and I'm just going to make my way up. So it's going to be lighter in the valley and darker at the ridge. I'm just going back and forth with the brush, trying not to go over my ridges too much. And keep them nice and sharp. So already we've got some mountains that look really far in the distance. I want you to take a look at yours that you painted and make sure you didn't make them too dark. That's a common mistake for beginners. So if you painted your ridge lines in with your sketch, look at the values, and this one should be really light, like I said, just a little bit darker than the top of your sky. All right, and once you get that done, next we're going to add a little bit of ultramarine blue into that initial color that we made for those. A little bit more purple, a little bit more ultramarine, and just a little more ultramarine maybe. Want to be a little bit darker. And this one's going to start right here, so you can see it's just a little bit darker. Getting this nice ridge line here. You want to cover up all your white space again. It's going to be a pretty repetitive tutorial now because these next few sections of mountain ridges, we're going to follow the same practice for all of them. Just trying to get the painting covered up. Okay, adding my little ridge lines, and my background sky is starting to get more dry now, so these mountains are going to be a little bit more sharp at the peaks. Okay, I like how that looks. We got the tops of them, and then once we do that, I'm just going back and forth a little bit with the brush, making sure you have good coverage there. And get the extra paint off your brush. Just dab it on the napkin, get a little bit of white on both sides of your brush, and start at the little valley, right behind the next ridge. And we're just working our way up. As I'm going back and forth with the brush here, I'm using less force. If you guys are having issues with seeing a lot of streaks on your painting when you're doing this, you might have the wrong type of paint or you might have the wrong type of brush. So if you have really cheap brushes that are like coarser feeling, like not soft, then sometimes that can give you streaks. And if you're using a really budget-friendly paint, like a $1 tube of paint, sometimes that paint doesn't have enough pigment in it, so that'll also give you streaks. So it might not be how you're painting, it might be what you're using to paint. Keep that in mind. All right, so I'm just touching up that little bit there. Don't want to have any streaks, want to cover up all my white space. Okay, now you guys can see farthest ridge. This ridge is a little closer. I'm going to go back over here, use that same color that I just had to put in this next ridge that we were painting in here. Taking more white for the base. Covering up all that space there. Okay, looks good. All right, continuing to move forward, I'm taking more ultramarine blue, a little bit of brown, a little bit more phthalo blue, a little bit more crimson, and a little bit more umber again. I just want to see, oh, okay, I think it needs to be a little darker, so I'm going to take more ultramarine. And crimson. And phthalo. All right, let's see, how's that look? That's better. Okay, and this one, same thing, just starting with the peaks, using my angled brush, so it's giving me that nice sharp ridge. Got another little peak right here. And I'm using a little bit more detail than I did when I first started painting in the peaks with that larger brush. Bringing this down, another little ridge there, a little sharper angle. Okay, and then yeah, again, I'm going to take some white. I'm going to mix a little bit of crimson in with that, a little bit phthalo, and just start at the base there, make my way up, use a little bit more phthalo. Continuing to go back and forth from the base there, making my way up, and not using as much pressure as I'm making my way up so that it gives me a little bit more of a blend. As we're getting closer to the viewer, we kind of want to see more brush strokes so that we get a little bit more of the details visible in the mountains. All right, that one's looking good. So we're making our way closer to the viewer. This next ridge line, I'm going to use more of my ultramarine blue, a little bit more brown, and my crimson. Getting both sides of the brush covered nicely. And we're going to start, I think it needs a little bit more crimson. We're going to start, same thing with the ridge line, covering up the sketch marks, covering up the white space. Making our way down. Going to mix in a little bit umber. Get our nice little peak right there. Gonna mix in a little bit more white. Make sure your edges are looking nice and sharp here. You don't want to have, I just mixed in a little bit of ultramarine blue there. You don't want to have soft edges anymore. Now we want to have nice sharp edges. And the angled brush or a flat tip brush are great for getting your nice sharp edges. All right, got that one. I'm gonna make my way over here. Still following that ridge line. It's a little more crimson. Another big one up here. Okay, and once we got those in there, I'm going to take more of my white A little bit of ultramarine mix in. And just start closer to the base of the next ridge, making your way up to where you want to blend. Back and forth, back and forth. And using less pressure when I'm going back and forth where it wants to blend. So here you can see I'm getting some streaks. I used to use a little too much paint there, so I'm just going to keep working around, doing my blending, and then I'm going to come back to that once I get some of the extra paint off of my brush, and that'll help me to get rid of those streaks. Another thing you guys might notice is it's really important to work on each ridge with this blend from the hazier valley up to the ridge. It's important to work on that while the paint is still wet. So I'm going to get the extra paint off my brush now. And now I can just go back and get that blended a little better. I'm using less pressure, making sure there's not a whole lot of extra paint floating around there. Starting to work the brush at different angles to make it look like I'm getting some more ridge lines. Really faint in here. Okay, that one looks really nice. And we're going to keep moving forward. This guy is going to be a little bit lighter because it's not super high up peak, but it is going to be a little bit darker than that light color we just put down. So I'm mixing in more Phthalo Blue, a little bit of crimson, some ultramarine, and some brown. And let's see, how's that? I think it's a little too dark, so I'm just mixing a little bit of white. That looks better. Okay, and we're just gonna cover up our sketch mark, cover up our white space. This nice ridge line that's a little more subtle. Right on in there. And mix in a little bit more of our white as we're moving down. Use a little bit more Phthalo Blue. There's not a huge change in value from this lighter valley to the ridge, but it is still a little bit lighter. And I'm working my brush strokes more at an angle this way here to show some of the details in the ridges and rocks making their way down. All right, that's looking good. Keep moving forward, starting with our little more phthalo, a little bit more crimson. I think I want to mix even more crimson in there. I think now it's just a little too dark, so I'll mix in some white. So you can always put a little bit of paint down and test it and see how that looks. And if it looks too dark, then it probably is too dark. And you can usually fix that by mixing a little bit of white in. And another thing to remember is with acrylic paint, it typically dries a little bit darker value than it looks when it's wet, first being applied to your painting canvas. Okay, I'm going to mix in some white, a little bit of ultramarine, a little phthalo, a little bit of umber. Starting down here, and I'm going to mix a little crimson in there too. Making my way up. So I think the trickiest thing about this painting is probably going to be getting your values right. So making sure you're not painting your ridges too dark. So try to keep that in mind this whole time, and If you do make something dark, you can too dark, and you realize that because you're like already using like pure blue by the time you're here and not mixing any white or other colors in, then you can always go back, just try to find which ridge it started to get a little bit too dark too early, and then just go over that one and then keep working forward again. So you do have to take a couple steps back, but it's easy to paint over acrylic paint if you do make a mistake. Okay, I'm taking some more ultramarine blue, some umber, and some phthalo. Let's do a little more umber. And this one here is kind of just coming down like so. Mixing in more white for the base of this area. Getting it on there, going back and forth, up and down. And using less force, keeping it nice and soft as I'm getting a little closer to the blending spot. And then I'm just layering up a little bit more of the deeper shadows here to build a little bit more depth. Okay, so we got the distant background mountains basically done now, and now we're going to move to this ridge line here. So I'm using more umber, phthalo, ultramarine, and I like that color a lot. I think that's pretty good. So phthalo blue, ultramarine blue, and umber, burnt umber. Putting my little ridges in here, just like I sketched them, but maybe with a little more detail. And by the way, this view here is one of the photos I took when I was hiking to Mount Eleanor in Olympic National Park in Washington State. This was one of the hardest hikes I've done. For the distance. There's a lot of elevation for a short distance. Alright, got that ridge looking pretty nice. Just going to jag up the edges here. So you can start to see a little bit of the trees. And keep working my way down. And this angled brush is giving me a nice look of the sharp little trees are starting to be visible on the peaks there, or on the ridge line. Okay, it's looking good. I'm going to mix more paint color here. So I need some umber, some blue, and some blue, some white. Keep making my way down where you get like a ridge and then a couple little jagged marks where some trees are visible. Gonna mix even more blue, ultramarine, into my paint here. Trying to keep nice, sharp edges, up and down brush strokes here for all the little trees along the ridge. Okay, that looks good. Now that that's all in there, we can mix a little bit of white into here and start to, if you want to use the larger brush, you can. I'm going to do that since there's a little bit more of an area to cover here. I just got the water off the brush, mixing a little bit of white in with my phthalo and my ultramarine and my umber. And just going back and forth. The paint's starting to dry faster, so I'm just gonna blend, make a little more of that color I had and let it blend. And I'm keeping the brush strokes at an angle, letting some areas show more of the light and letting other areas be a little bit deeper in shadow. And that's giving more of the textured rock face look. Down here it's just pretty light. Same with this region. And just gently trying to get this to blend a little bit with my darker colors. Okay, I like how that looks. Next, I'm going to keep using this flat tip brush. And now we've made it to the area where we have trees. So we're going to take some olive green and white and umber and ultramarine blue. I'm just going to make a base color for my foliage covered rock here. So I'm going back and forth, trying not to keep it too perfect. I want to have a little bit of like fuzzy edge there because the brush is giving me that. All right, got that on there. These two rocks do not have any foliage on them, but there is a bit kind of sticking out right down here, so I'm going to put some of that there. We've also got some green right in here, so I'm just going to do a little bit something just to show where we have some green. So in the center bottom, this area, and we'll layer over this later. This is just for us to kind of marker where the green foliage will be. Okay, while this is still drying, I'm gonna work on the shadows for the green area. So I'm gonna take some phthalo blue and some burnt umber and a little bit of crimson, a little bit of phthalo green. And this is going to give me a nice shadow for the greens, starting it right about there. I'm going to put another little area with more shadow right in here. So you're leaving a little space for where it's more highlighted. And then again, add a little shadow in this half, a little shadow right here, and split that again into two sections. And a little more right down there. All right, I'm going to clean that brush off. And next, let's work on these two rocks here. So we're going to start with white, burnt umber, ultramarine blue, crimson, phthalo, more crimson, a little bit of yellow, and that's going to give us like a neutral purplish brown color. And I'm just going to fill this in for most of that rock for now, leaving maybe a little bit of space at the top. This is like our base color for the rock. We're going to have a deeper shadow and we're going to have a deeper or a brighter highlight too, but for now we're just filling in the space. Okay, ultramarine, umber, red, blue, yellow, a little more red, so it's more on the purple side. Okay, and then right here we're gonna put the shadows in, or the base mid-color, mid-tone value. And that goes to about there. And one more of these in this bottom corner. And just a little bit in there as well. So I left a little white space for where I'm going to have my highlights on the rock. Before I do that, I need to do the trees back here. So for the trees, we've got some trees. I'm going to take some umber and phthalo blue, olive green. That's a really deep, a little bit of a phthalo green too. That's a really deep brownish green, really dark color. Okay, and then we're going to pick where we want to put some trees. So if you want to put some in the center, I definitely want one right here before the bottom of this green spot, and I only want it to come up height-wise to about right there. So if you want it to come all the way up, it's just going to look like that's a lot closer to you. So keep that in mind. Try not to make the trees too varying in size. And you also don't want to have them like perfectly evenly spaced. And I have a few more in here, kind of blocking this, a lot of this stuff. Okay, so now I put some trees in, I put the stumps in, and then the next step is to use this flat tip brush, or you could use your angle brush, whatever's going to give you a better controlled little dab of tree line. So I'm just taking little dabs, only using the angle of the brush to do a couple little branches coming out from that main central stub part. And this is pretty quick and easy to do. Just want some of them to go right across center, some to only be on the left, some only on the right. In general, it's getting wider and farther from the stump as you're getting down. Okay, I'm liking that. Next, this one, just starting small at the top, working out the angles, getting wider as we go. This guy too, a little bit, just a little bit near the top, and then getting a little bit more pressure and a little bit thicker as we're getting farther from the central stump spot. Okay, next one. And if you happen to make one like too big, like right here, like if I make this like a little too thick, too close, then just put another one coming up a little more, and now it just looks like there's a cluster. Just getting nice good coverage with my trees. They're a little bit thicker, with more branches towards the base. You want to cover up most of the stump line that you put in. I just put a little bit of water on my brush so I can get a bit more control with my brush strokes here. Gonna add a little umber. Dabbing the paints coming out from the stump. And down here, pretty far from the central focal point, so just some quick little dabs are fine down there. Okay, so we got those trees in there. I'm gonna put the flat tip brush back down and go back to my smaller angled brush. And we're gonna let those trees sit and dry for a minute or two while I add some highlights to other parts of the painting. So I'm going to mix my yellow with my olive green and a little bit of crimson. And let's do a little ultramarine blue. Okay, and this, and some white. There we go. All right, this highlight, I'm getting both sides of the brush covered pretty good in that little spot. And now we're just gonna go right at the edge where we have this section of grass. Adding our highlights in. It's going back and forth. I don't want a perfect smooth brush strokes here. I want jagged, textured looking brush strokes to show that we've got some foliage growing on that rock. All right, that looks nice. Next, we can add our highlights to the trees now. So I'm going to take some white and emerald green and some ultramarine blue. So it's a little bit cooler than that green we just made. And we're just going to take this angled brush and put a couple little highlights on some sections of the trees, only like at the top part of each little section. We don't want it to be too much. You don't want to have a really thick blob. You just want a tiny little bit, so I'm barely using any pressure to let this paint just have a light coverage right at the top of each little section of branches on the trees. And it doesn't have to be like perfect even coverage on every single branch. Some branches are going to catch more light than others. This helps to make your tree look more three-dimensional and less flat. And it's mostly just little horizontal dabs of paint. It's giving us a little more texture, a little bit more dimension to the trees. Okay, it looks nice. Now let's work on this here, this rock. I'm going to mix some white with some umber and a little bit of ultramarine, a little bit of crimson. So we get like a light purple brownish color. And getting that on both sides of the brush here. Now I'm just going to take that and same thing, do that nice jaggedy edge right at the top where I left that white space. Trying to get good coverage, not leaving white space. I don't want it to be too soft, I want it to be sharp. And there's a couple little spots where we are catching more of the highlight on the rock, so I'm just keeping these angled brush strokes really loosely, just letting it pick and choose where we're going to put those spots. Okay, that looks good. And before I go into the shadows on that, I think I am going to go to the next one, moving closer to the viewer. So I'm just going to mix a little bit more white in, make this one even brighter. Try to have nice sharp edges here. Covering up my sketch marks. Okay, nice coverage all the way down, covering up the white space. Following those void, empty spaces that I left for where I want to put my highlights in. All right, this painting is coming along. Now that that is in, we're going to do our shadows on the rocks. So we're going to take our ultramarine blue with umber. You don't want to have any white on your brush here. And some ultramarine. If you guys have the color black and you want to use black, you can. But this is going to give you a little bit more of a natural look, I think. And mix a little bit of yellow. So it's kind of making my own black. But it's really just like a dark neutral purple-ish color. All right, and then this is just going to go right at the top above that highlight section because that's where I'm going to have my deepest shadow on this rock. Another one over this highlight. I'm going to do a couple sharp little lines. Here we're not going to have a whole lot of blending. We're going to have more like sharp edge lines for where we have abrupt shadows. If you want to get a little bit more textured, you can with some thicker paint applications. If you want it to look kind of streaky, you can by using less paint on your brush. Filling in the rest of that little white space. Here my paint's still wet, so it's blending a bit, which is what I wanted in this area. So I'm just getting a couple little sections where the darker color is blending in and giving me a little bit lighter shadows. Just overlaying some more shadows in here. I'm going to take more umber. Keeping the shadows dark. More umber. Okay, now that that's on there, I'm just going to add a little bit more of a highlight, so more of that white with just a little bit of umber. And just building the highlights up over those shadows. It's still wet where I'm doing this, and it's going to blend a little bit, but that's okay. It's going to give a little bit more of the look I'm going for, a little bit more painterly. And mix a little bit of yellow and crimson in there. Just to give it a little bit more color, more warmth from the highlights. A couple spots. I'm going to take a little bit more umber. Let's do that crimson and yellow color with this. And just a little bit more in here I want to work. Okay, that looks nice. Okay, I'm going to add a little bit more highlight to the grass. So going back to our green with yellow. And there was a little bit of blue in there too. Just going to build up a bit more of a highlight in a couple spots. Just putting it in a few little sections for some highlights. That looks nice. And now we can use our liner brush for our grasses. So we're going to dip this brush in the water, get some of our phthalo green and our yellow. Okay, and now that I got that in there, I'm going to go over these sections where I had some green, but I haven't done much more to it yet. And I'm just going to take the liner brush. You want to get a little bit more water on your brush for these. and then that'll give you a bit more of the control that you want for the nice smooth brush strokes. Starting out with my lighter highlight color. Gonna add a few more in here. You want to make sure at this point that you don't really have any more white space on your canvas. You want that all to be covered up, or you're about to cover it up with these grasses and wildflowers. Just going back and forth, making like semi-rounded little marks for the brush strokes. All right, now I'm going to take more of my phthalo green and crimson and my olive green. Get a nice shadow for some of these. We have pretty harsh contrast in the shadows here because they're so close to the foreground. The light source is over there. So just in front of the highlighted blades of grass, you're going to put some shadows. Some a little deeper. Okay, then we can take more of our yellow and white with a little bit of phthalo green and boost a few more little highlights. And the more pressure you use with this liner brush, the thicker your line's going to be, and the less pressure you use, the lighter and thinner the lines are going to be. Then if you want to add a few little wildflowers, you can. So I'm going to take some white and just mix it in where I had that red and yellow together. And I'm just going to add a few little flowers. You don't want your flowers to be all perfectly, symmetrically shaped or spaced. You want them to have a little variety. Let's do a little bit of purple flowers. So I'm going to mix some crimson with some ultramarine. Put a few in here. And you can do a nice little highlight on those, just at the tops. You can pick whatever type of wildflower you'd like to add, or you could just completely not add them in if you want to. Totally up to you. And then I'm just going to add a couple little flower stems, just so the flowers look a little bit more legit. Can add even more blue and crimson to get a deeper little base, or add some flowers that are more in shadow. And then for this guy, you can make a little bit more umber, yellow, a little crimson for a little spot in the center there. Just adding a few more little petals leaves. And maybe just a few more little grasses right in between here. Crimson and green, olive green here. All right, guys. And with that, I'm going to call this a finished painting. Yay! Congratulations, you guys made it through. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed this painting tutorial of mountains in the Olympic Peninsula of Washington State. This was a pretty loose brushwork tutorial for the most part in this foreground area. Hopefully this gave you some more tips on blending colors, you're working your values, and then accurately painting in different size mountain peaks and stuff like that. Thanks again for watching this painting tutorial, everyone. Have a wonderful day. If you haven't subscribed to my channel, make sure you do so you don't miss any more fun painting tutorials like this one. Have a great day and happy painting!